So my friend got in touch with me the other day, and no, I haven't just invented him for the purpose of making content. This really happened. So he's just joined a covers band. He's singing lead mostly, but he also has to sing some harmonies from time to time. And he hasn't had a lot of experience doing that, so he got in touch with me, his musician friend, for a little bit of advice. So what I'm not going to do is show you 5 quick tricks for how to sing in harmony. I can't stand any video that says you can cheat your way into being a good musician. I think you're really doing a disservice to both your viewers and music as an art form. And look, I don't want to overstate this, but I sincerely hope that you are murdered by someone you love most in the world. What? Oh, alright, I'll edit it out. No, I will. Now, music is a discipline, like any. It takes knowledge and practice. So, like any good teacher, I want to give you the knowledge, and I want to show you how to apply it in practice. And then you have to go away and do all the work. So the song he asked me about was Zombie by the Cranberries. Now, the first hurdle with this song, of course, is that there's barely any vocal harmonies in the original. There's just a couple of notes in the chorus. I'm bae. Sweet, you get that? Yeah, cool. And we'll use that one the second time, right? Yeah, cool. I'll see you later. So you'll have to write your own. So really, when you're asking me how do I sing in harmony, what you're really asking is how do I write melodies in counterpoint? And that's a fantastic question, which means I've got to give you a crash course in 2-part writing, which is really just all the information that I learned from learning the harmony that was taught to me at the Sydney Conservatorium during my Bachelor of Music. Now, that was a fantastic course, and within the space of 2 years, those of us who cared about learning harmony and didn't just dismiss it because, why do I need to know it if I just want to be an opera singer? I don't know, maybe they were trying to make you a well-rounded musician, Julia. Anyway, within the space of 2 years, they taught us all how to write from 1st through 5th species counterpoint. Now we're going to begin with 1st species counterpoint, which is just note against note. So it's the 2 melodies in the same rhythm. And when you're singing note against note, what you want to use is consonant intervals. So looking at the intervals that are available to us in the Western tuning system, everything from the smallest interval, which is the semitone or a minor second, all the way up to the octave, because after that they really start repeating. A minor ninth is simply just a minor second plus an octave. So those are the ones that we consider the intervals. Of that list, the ones that we consider consonant are the major and minor thirds, major and minor sixths, as well as the octave and the unison. Which is really just the same thing, because an octave is just a big unison. Now there are moments when perfect fifths, and their inversion, perfect fourths, are permissible, but they have to be used carefully. They must be preceded and followed by consonant intervals. And they very strictly cannot be used in parallel, because this will sound too much like Gregorian chant, and what was the point of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance if not to get away from all that churchy shit? Now it's my belief that you can even use a tritone or an augmented fourth, which is considered the most dissonant interval, as long as you resolve it properly, resolving the tritone correctly, as if it were part of the dominant seventh that it implies, or, well, in this case, the diminished seventh chord that it implies. I'm using it here to resolve back to the tonic using a what's known as a common tone diminished seventh chord. It's where you take the tonic chord and using the tonic note as a common tone, you build a diminished seventh over it as an embellishing chromatic chord. Now, look, this is leaping a few hundred years ahead. You know, the 2-part writing I'm starting with is from the Baroque period, and this is much more romantic device, so apologies, but I still think it's relevant. So look, as long as you resolve the tritone correctly, with the scalic seventh resolving up to the tonic and the fourth resolving down to the third, I think it makes for a stronger cadence. See, a typical cadence in 2-part writing is simply going to have a sixth or a third which is going to resolve to an octave or a unison, and to me that's a weaker cadence because the only implied chord is that of a dominant triad, whereas if you use the tritone, you can imply the dominant seventh, and I think that makes for a much stronger cadence because of the implication. So while you're establishing the intervallic relationship of each voice vertically, you also need to keep in mind the different kinds of melodic contour that you'll create horizontally and the consequent relationship of each contour to one another. Now the key, both practically and aesthetically, is variety. So let's look at the different kinds of motion. So there's similar motion, which is just voices in parallel, which you can do at the interval of a third or the interval of a sixth. Now that can be above or below, but there's something very important to consider, because you may notice that when we do a third above, we end up getting the exact same counter melody that we did when we went a sixth below, and that's no coincidence. inversions. Yes, indeed, thank you, Betty. Now, a quick side note about interval inversions. The reason that a major sixth below is the same as a minor third above is because that's how interval inversions work. To invert an interval, the tonality is reversed and the numerical distance adds up to 9. A major third inverts to a minor sixth, a minor third inverts to a major sixth, a diminished fifth inverts to an augmented fourth, a perfect fourth inverts to a perfect fifth because, well, they're perfect intervals, they don't have major or minor variations, so if you invert a perfect, it stays a perfect, it's only the numbers that change. That's why they're perfect intervals. There is no major or minor variation between the two scales, because they're perfect interval. A major seventh becomes a minor second, a major second becomes a minor seventh. Reverse the tonality, add the numbers up to 9. The more you know. Alright, back to you with the melodic contours. Yeah, there's oblique motion, where one voice stays the same while the other moves. That's represented well in one of the earlier examples. And there's contrary motion, which is where the two voices go in the opposite directions, and that's seen at the start of the same example. Having voices move in contrary motion allows for a really great device called a voice exchange. That's where, as you can see in this example where you have a scalic movement in a descending pattern, you can mirror that in the other voice and have the same scale ascending where the voices will swap the notes, passing through an octave in the middle. Now, as I was saying, there are great stylistic suggestions for aesthetics as well as for practical rules. And it's all about variety. Doing everything in parallel constantly is boring. Having voices move predictably, also boring. Now, of all the examples I wrote in first species, this one was my favourite. Now, that might seem like complex chromatic harmony, and, well, it definitely will be when I'm done with it. But it's really just following all of those principles. As you can see, it is always using consonant intervals. Here we have a major third, minor sixth, major sixth, minor sixth, minor sixth, minor third, and then unison. And likewise, it's always making sure to use different kinds of motion. It starts with contrary motion, then oblique, then parallel motion for a bit, then contrary motion, parallel, and then finishing on contrary motion. So that's the basics of first species counterpoint, and now we get to second species counterpoint. This is where it starts to get really fun, because you're using two notes against one, and that means you can start using more dissonance in the form of melodic embellishment. Now, there's a few different kinds of melodic embellishment. Let's look at the various kinds of them. The first is consonant skip. Now, this doesn't strictly use dissonance per se. This is where you simply leap from one chord tone to another. Here's an example of a second species counterpoint using exclusively consonant skips. The next kind of melodic embellishment is known as the passing note. That is where we step in scalic motion between two chord tones. A neighbour note is where you step away from a chord tone in one direction and then back to the same chord tone. In this next example, we can see all three of these techniques: consonant skips, passing notes, and neighbour notes. The next kind we'll look at is an escape tone. This is quite a fun one because it's where if you don't have clear scalic motion from one chord tone to another, then you can simply step in one direction to a dissonance and then leap down to the consonants. And it kind of works like a bit of an escape hatch if you don't have clear scalic motion. It's a cute name. Now, in these examples, I've used all the dissonance on the offbeat, but you can absolutely use these dissonances on the downbeat. Even if the Wikipedia entry didn't say so, I've updated it with the correct information. You're welcome. So it's simply known as accented dissonance, and the only rule to follow is that it must resolve to a consonance on the offbeat. They usually take the form of passing and neighbour notes. So now we get to third species counterpoint, which is really just the same except using more notes. You can use 3 or 4. I'm not sure if there's actually an upper limit to it. I mean, arguably you could have 12 note third species counterpoint, 12 notes against one. Is there a point at which it stops being proper counterpoint? Anyone who knows more about this than me, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, here's an example of third species counterpoint that you're probably quite familiar with, which I have annotated so that you can see how each note is functioning, whether it's consonant or dissonant, and if it is dissonant, what kind of melodic embellishment it is. When Bach writes, every note has a purpose. Now, when it gets even more fun is when you start using those dissonances on the beat in the form of suspensions and anticipations. That's known as fourth species counterpoint. So a suspension is where you take a consonant note from one beat and then hold it across the change of note in the other voice so that it becomes a dissonance suspended from the consonant note before and then resolves down to the consonants on the offbeat. Now they often occur in sequence like so, and I really love this moment in particular because the best one is when you get to this one. Because unlike all the other suspensions, they were all perfect fourths resolving to thirds, whereas this one is the only tritone in the scale. It is the augmented fourth, and to me that has the most sense of yearning and longing and desperation trying to resolve to that third, which is why I like to prolong it a little bit longer, add a bit of vibrato in there just to really sell it. Anticipations are simply the reverse of this. This is where a consonant note that would be consonant with the chord that's about to come is sounded a moment before the chord actually falls, so that it is dissonant on the offbeat and then when the chord falls it becomes consonant. Now remember, this is different to the accented dissonance that we saw in second species counterpoint because the suspension must be prepared as a consonance on the previous beat rather than simply being a neighbour or a passing note that falls on the beat. So then finally we get to fifth species counterpoint, which is really just a combination of all of these using different rhythms. See, in first through fourth species counterpoint, there's an expectation that the rhythms will strictly follow the pattern that's established. In first species, it's simply one note against another, making the two melodies the exact same rhythms. In second species, it's two notes against one. Third species, whatever amount of notes you're using against the original melody, or the cantus firmus as it's known. And in fourth species, it is just two notes against one, but with the ties that allow for the suspensions. Fifth species counterpoint, combining all of these, creates the very familiar sound of counterpoint that we all know and love from the common practice era, which is often referred to as classical music. So, for doing a counter melody to the tune of Zombie, I don't know, just do some of that to taste, whichever bits you think work. Or watch the second part of this video. Yeah, obviously there's not going to be any help to him. Yeah, that's the joke. For fuck's sake.